The night was supposed to be nothing but routine. Jessica had a girls' night planned: dinner, drinks, laughs. I had no reason to expect anything other than that. I stayed home, tried to focus on the usual, waiting for her to return. But as the hours stretched on, I began to notice the little things. The things I'd been brushing off for weeks. Her texts had become shorter, more evasive. When she was home, she seemed distracted, her attention elsewhere. Conversations felt forced, like she was trying to keep her mind on something else. And then there was the way she kept checking her phone. Every time she did, I saw a flash of something on her face, almost like guilt, but she quickly masked it. Still, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe she was just stressed. Maybe work was weighing on her. But deep down, that voice in my head kept growing louder, nagging at me, telling me I was missing something. So when Jessica left that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was an uneasy pit in my stomach. I brushed it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But as soon as the door closed behind her, my mind started to race. I don't know why, but I decided to check something. I wasn't sure what exactly, but it felt like something was about to happen, something I wouldn't be able to ignore. I started looking through her things, texts, emails, anything that could give me a hint. That's when I found it, a message tucked deep in her phone. It wasn't a casual message. The tone was different. There was an intimacy in the words, a closeness that made my heart sink. She was talking to someone who wasn't me. I wasn't ready for what that meant. The evidence was right there, plain as day. I tried to shake it off, tried to tell myself I was reading too much into it. But deep down I knew. I knew I was just one step away from a truth I didn't want to face. I set the phone down and ran my hands over my face. My heart was pounding, but I couldn't stop. I had no more. That's when the idea hit me, the recorder. It had been sitting there in the corner of the living room, unnoticed for weeks. I'd gotten it out once before, thinking about doing something like this. Now it seemed like the only way to get the truth. I wasn't proud of it, but the truth was I was desperate. Desperate for clarity. Desperate to know if my gut feeling was right. And so I hit record. I spent the next few hours pacing, waiting. Every little sound in the house made my heart jump. Was it her coming back early? Was it the sound of footsteps outside someone else's? My mind kept spiraling, imagining all sorts of things. I tried to distract myself, watched TV, scrolled aimlessly on my phone, but nothing could calm the tension that had built up in my chest. Finally, I heard the door open, followed by the familiar sound of her heels clicking. On the hardwood floor, I stood frozen, waiting. She entered the living room with a smile like everything was normal. But I could see it. That shift. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile you give when you're trying too hard to seem okay. When you're trying to hide something that's eating away at you. "Hey, babe," Jessica said, her voice too high, too cheerful. She walked over to me, kissed me on the cheek, a quick peck like she was in a rush. I forced a smile, but inside everything felt like it was falling apart. I glanced at her, studying her face for any sign of guilt, any crack in the facade she was wearing. "How was the night?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "It was fine," she said, a little too quickly. "Just drink some stuff, you know." But I could tell something was off. There was a nervousness in her voice, a hesitation. My gut told me I was right. She wasn't being honest with me. I had to do this now. "Can we talk?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "There's something I need to ask you." She looked at me, brows furrowing. "What's wrong? Why are you being so serious?" I didn't answer her. Instead, I stood up and reached over to grab the recorder I had set up earlier. The moment I hit play, the sound of her voice filled the room. And then another voice. A man's voice. The color drained from her face. She froze. For a second, I thought she might collapse, but she caught herself, her eyes darting around the room, looking for an escape. But there was nowhere to go. The truth was right in front of her. "What is this, Jessica?" My voice was shaking now, the weight of what I was hearing crushing me. "What's going on here?" Her mouth opened, but no words came out. The guilt was written all over her face now. She was trapped. I had caught her. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. "You don't understand. It's not what it seems." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Not what it seems. Are you kidding me? I've been hearing you two laughing, talking that doesn't sound like nothing." She took a step back, but I could see her mind racing, trying to find some kind of excuse, some way to explain this away. It just happened okay. I never meant for it to get this far. It was just a mistake, a stupid mistake. Her voice trembled, but there was something in her eyes that made my stomach twist. She wasn't just guilty. She was defensive. You think I'm stupid? I snapped, my anger starting to rise. You think I won't notice? You think I wouldn't hear this? You've been hiding this from me, lying to my face. Jessica opened her mouth to speak, but I couldn't hear any more excuses. The weight of everything hit me all at once, betrayal, confusion, anger, and I was struggling to keep my composure. Her eyes flickered to the door as if she were considering running, but instead she just stood there, her arms crossed defensively. You're making this bigger than it is, she said, her voice cold. It's not like you've been perfect either, you know? Her words hit like a slap, and for a moment, I felt like I was drowning in everything she was throwing at me. But I couldn't back down now. Not after everything. No, I said, voice firm. This isn't about me. This is about you lying to me. You're the one who's been sneaking around, not me. She turned away for a moment, letting out a sigh. I don't know what you want from me, okay? I'm sorry. I am. But this isn't going to fix anything. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't stand the way she was justifying this, the way she was minimizing everything she had done. No, Jessica, you don't get to apologize and make everything better. Not like this. She didn't respond. She just stood there, her back to me, as if she couldn't bear to look me in the eye anymore. The silence between us stretched out heavy and suffocating. In that moment, I realized this was no longer just about what she had done. This was about who she had become and what I was going to do next. I don't know what I expected from her. Some kind of remorse, maybe a real apology. Something that would make me feel like the woman I married was still there somewhere. But the longer she stood there with her back turned to me, the more I realized she wasn't sorry. She wasn't sorry at all. I took a deep breath, trying to control the storm brewing inside me. So that's it then? You just thought you could get away with it? Hide it from me. Pretend like nothing was happening. Jessica's shoulders stiffened, but she didn't turn around. Instead, she spoke quietly, almost dismissively. I didn't think you'd find out. Honestly, I didn't want to hurt you. But you've been so distant lately, and I don't know. You just what? I snapped, cutting her off. Needed someone else? Needed someone to pay attention to you, because I didn't? Is that what you're saying? The words felt like daggers, but they had to be said. She had to hear it. She needed to know what she'd done to me to us. Jessica finally turned around. Her face flushed, but her eyes didn't meet mine. You're making it worse, she said, her voice low. You're twisting everything I'm saying. I didn't mean for this to happen. I want to scream at her, to shake her and demand answers. But instead, I stood there, my fists clenched at my sides. I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't. How could I? You didn't mean for it to happen? I repeated, my voice rising. How you explain that then? I gestured toward the recorder, still lying on the coffee table, the damning proof of her betrayal. How do you explain the fact that I had to find out from that? From hearing you with him? She opened her mouth to say something, but nothing came out. For the first time, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Maybe guilt, maybe fear, but it was gone before she could process it. She took a step toward me, then stopped, as if she wasn't sure if she should approach or back away. You don't get it, do you? I continued, my voice thick with frustration. You think you can just explain it all away, like it's no big deal? Like I don't matter. But you're wrong. You've ruined everything. Everything I believed in. Because eyes narrowed, her chin lifting as if she was suddenly putting up a wall. I don't need this, she said, her voice tight with a strange mixture of defiance and bitterness. You're making this out to be some huge thing when it's not. It was just a mistake, okay? A stupid mistake. I was lonely. I didn't know what else to do. Her words hit me like a slap, each one more cutting than the last. Lonely. That's what she was calling it. As if that somehow made everything okay. As if being lonely was some sort of excuse for throwing everything away. I shook my head in disbelief. Lonely, I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady, but I could feel the anger creeping in. Lonely? You couldn't come to me? Talk to me? You couldn't try to fix this? Instead, you chose him. You chose him over everything we built together. She didn't respond. She just stood there, arms crossed, looking at me like I was the one who had done something wrong. You don't get it, do you? I said, stepping closer, my anger now bubbling over. You're not just betraying me. You're betraying us. Everything we've worked for, everything I thought we were. And you're sitting here acting like it's no big deal. Jessica's eyes flashed with something I couldn't quite place: frustration. Maybe? But just exhaustion. I don't owe you an explanation. I don't owe you anything. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. You don't owe me anything? I repeated, incredulous. You think this doesn't matter? You think I don't matter? You're standing here telling me you don't owe me anything after everything we've been through. I didn't answer, just stared at me with this cold look in her eyes, a look I didn't recognize. The look of someone who was done. Done with me. Done with us. And that's when it hit me. The truth. The full weight of it. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't trying to salvage anything. She wasn't even pretending anymore. Jessica had checked out. She had already made her decision. And no amount of fighting, no amount of pleading was going to change that. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. But one thing was crystal clear: whatever we had, it was gone. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew I couldn't stay here, not like this. Not with her looking at me like I was nothing. I can't do this anymore, I said, the words coming out in a rush. I can't keep pretending everything's fine. I need to figure out what happens next. But I know one thing for sure. This isn't something I can fix. She didn't argue, didn't fight back. She just stood there, arms crossed, staring at me with that cold expression. And in that moment I realized something. I had already lost her. The silence that followed felt unbearable. It was like we were in two different worlds now. Her standing there, arms crossed, eyes averted, and me standing frozen in the reality of everything I had just discovered. All the years, all the memories we'd built together felt distant, as if they were part of some other life. This wasn't the woman I had married. This wasn't the woman I trusted. I turned my back on her for a moment, trying to catch my breath. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't get enough air. The weight of the betrayal, the lies, it was all too much. You really done then? I asked quietly, not sure if I even wanted the answer. My voice was low, but I carried the exhaustion of everything I was holding in. Is that what this is? You're telling me that after everything, you're just done? She didn't answer immediately, and when she finally did, her voice was a little softer, but still guarded. I don't know what you want from me, okay? You're not perfect either. You think I'm the only one who's been struggling? The words stung, but I could see that this was her attempt at deflecting. She wasn't taking responsibility. She was still blaming everything but herself. No, Jessica, I replied, turning to face her again. I'm not perfect, but I never made the choice to betray you. To disrespect you the way you've disrespected me. Her face tightened. You don't understand how hard this is for me either. I've been dealing with my own stuff. You don't even see it. I took a step toward her, my frustration rising. You're right. I didn't see it. But the one thing I do know is that I never turned to someone else behind your back. I never went out looking for something I could get from someone else because I felt alone. She flinched slightly, but the expression on her face didn't soften. There was no apology, no regret. She was cornered, but she was still fighting for control. You don't get it, she repeated, her voice growing colder. I'm not the bad guy here. It was like she was speaking a different language, one where nothing she did was wrong. I didn't know how to reach her anymore. The woman I thought I knew was slipping further and further away with every word she said. I'm not saying you're the bad guy, I said, my voice rising with disbelief. I'm saying you're not the person I thought you were. The person I married. I don't recognize you anymore. She didn't respond to that. Instead, she turned her back on me again, walking toward the door. Maybe it's better if you don't recognize me, she muttered under her breath, her tone sharp. Maybe it's better if we both stop pretending. I felt my stomach drop. The finality in her words hit me harder than I expected. She was done, completely done. I had been hoping, stupidly naively, that there was something left to salvage, something we could fix, but standing there, watching her walk away, I realized there was no fixing. There was no going back. Jessica, I started, but I couldn't bring myself to say anything more. The words felt hollow, useless. She stopped at the door, looking back at me over her shoulder. I don't want to fight anymore, she said quietly. I'm tired. And if you think I'm going to sit here and explain myself, I'm not. I can't. Not anymore. I wanted to say something, anything to stop her, but the truth was I was out of words. I was out of strength. With one last look, she stepped out the door, closing it softly behind her. The sound of the door shutting felt like a final nail in the coffin. I stood there in the silence, staring at the space she had just occupied, trying to process what had just happened. But all I could think was, this is over. This is really over. And in that moment, I couldn't breathe. The house felt so much emptier now that Jessica was gone. The silence was suffocating, pressing down on me in ways I couldn't explain. It was the kind of silence that fills every corner of your life when everything you thought you knew comes crashing down. I stood there for a long time, staring at the door, unable to move, unsure of what to do next. Eventually, I collapsed onto the couch. My mind raced. What was I supposed to do now? What was she going to do? I knew she wasn't coming back. I knew she was already gone in her own way, emotionally and physically. And that hit me harder than anything else. The realization that Jessica, the woman I'd spent years with, had already checked out. Long before I ever found out about her betrayal. The tears didn't come. Not yet. Instead, a dull, cold rage simmered in the pit of my stomach. I wanted to call her, scream at her, ask her how she could do this to me, to us. But I knew that would only make things worse. She'd made her choice. She'd made it clear that she didn't care anymore. I pulled out my phone, staring at it for what felt like an eternity. I thought about texting her, telling her how much this hurt. Telling her I couldn't believe she would throw everything away for someone else. But in the end, I just put the phone down, not knowing what good it would do. My thoughts kept drifting back to the recording. The way her voice sounded on it, laughing, talking to another man, the man who had, somehow, become more important than me. It made me sick to my stomach, and I felt that sharp pain again, the betrayal deep in my chest. I tried to distract myself, grabbed a beer from the fridge, flipped through the channels. On TV, but nothing helped. The weight of everything was just too heavy. I kept replaying the night in my mind, trying to find some clue, some sign I had missed, some way I could have seen this coming. But it was useless. The truth was clear. I had been blind to what was right in front of me. I had ignored the signs, tried to brush them off, and now here I was, alone with nothing but the wreckage of my marriage. It was hours before I got up from the couch, my mind a blur. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I couldn't just sit there anymore. I wandered through the house, going through the motions, picking up her things, putting them away, cleaning up after her like I had done for years. But it all felt so pointless. The house didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a prison, a place I had once shared with someone I thought I knew, but now it was empty. It was just me with all the shattered pieces of a life I wasn't sure I wanted anymore. And then, just as I was about to turn off the lights and go to bed, my phone buzzed. I stared at the screen, seeing her name flash across the screen, the one thing I wasn't ready to see. Jessica. I couldn't bring myself to answer. Not yet, but something inside me, something weak, something foolish compelled me to open the message. It was short, just a few words, but it sent a chill through me. We need to talk. I stared at the message, not knowing how to respond. I wanted to tell her to go to hell. I wanted to tell her I didn't need any more of her lies, any more of her excuses. The small part of me, maybe it was the part that still wanted to believe in her, the part that wasn't ready to let go, was tempted to reply. But I didn't. I couldn't. I sat there, letting the phone slip from my hand onto the table. The weight of the message hung in the air, but I knew deep down I had already made my decision. There was no going back from this. What had happened between us, it was done, and any attempt at reconciliation now would only drag out the inevitable. I stood up, turned off the lights, and walked to the bedroom. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the bed we had shared for so long. I needed distance. I needed time to think. The bed felt too big without her next to me, but it also felt too small for the life I now had to rebuild. I closed my eyes, the emptiness consuming me, and for the first time in years I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But I knew one thing for sure. It would be without her. The next morning came with the kind of heaviness that I couldn't shake. I woke up, staring at the ceiling, still not entirely sure how to process what had happened. The night before, I hadn't slept well, probably because my mind was spinning with too many thoughts. None of them good. Every part of my body felt sore, like I had been carrying a weight around for days, and now that weight was finally catching up with me. I grabbed my phone. The notification from Jessica was still there, haunting me like some unfinished business. She'd sent that message hours ago, but I still hadn't responded. Part of me knew I should have just blocked her number and moved on, but I couldn't bring myself to do that. A small part of me, the part that still wasn't ready to fully accept this, was hoping that she'd have some kind of explanation, some kind of way to undo the damage. But I was fooling myself. The phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, my stomach twisted as I saw it was a call. Jessica. I stared at the screen for a moment before silencing it. There was no way I was ready for that. Not today. Not yet. I got out of bed, the cold air hitting me as I walked into the kitchen. I tried to distract myself by making coffee the familiar routine of the morning almost comforting. The smell of the brewing coffee was like a small reminder that life was still going on, even if everything else felt like it was crumbling. I turned on the TV, but I wasn't really watching. My mind was still with Jessica, still haunted by the image of her standing in that doorway. Her face a mixture of guilt and cold indifference. The anger inside me was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but now it was mixing with something else, sadness, a kind of hopelessness that I didn't know how to deal with. It was then that I started thinking about what came next. What was I supposed to do now? The house felt like a prison, and yet I couldn't bring myself to leave. Every time I thought about what was next, about what I could do, where I could go, my mind just went blank. The idea of starting over, of trying to rebuild my life, felt so overwhelming. But what was I supposed to do? Stay in this empty house, pretending that things could go back to normal? I grabbed my keys, tossed my jacket on, and walked out the door. I needed to clear my head. I needed to get away from the walls that seemed to be closing in around me. I drove aimlessly for a while, trying to put some distance between myself and the mess. That had been my life. Every street, every turn felt foreign, like I was no longer familiar with my own surroundings. I found myself in a park sitting in the car, staring out at the empty space. I tried to breathe, tried to push the anger and the sadness down, but it was no use. It was all there, right beneath the surface. I thought about Jessica again, about her lies, about the way she had stood there and tried to justify everything, the way she hadn't even seemed to care when she walked out. I thought about the moments when I still believed in us, when I thought we could overcome anything, and now I was left with nothing but questions. How had it all gone so wrong? How had I missed all the signs? I couldn't help but feel stupid. How had I let her fool me for so long? How had I allowed myself to believe that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't? After sitting there for what felt like an eternity, I drove back home. The house was still empty, still silent, still the same as when I left. But now it felt even emptier. I grabbed my phone again. No new messages. But the weight of that last one, the one I hadn't responded to, was still there. Jessica was still trying to reach out, still trying to make things right, but I knew better. There was nothing left to salvage. No amount of apologies, no explanations could fix the brokenness between us. The damage had been done. I sat back down on the couch, the same spot where I had sat the night before when everything fell apart. I couldn't go on pretending anymore. This wasn't the life I'd signed up for. This wasn't what I had worked so hard for. I closed my eyes, thinking about what had come before our first date, the way we used to talk for hours, the way I used to think we were invincible. It all felt like a dream now, like something that wasn't mine anymore. And that's when it hit me, I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep living in the past. I needed to move forward. I needed to figure out what my life looked like without her in it. I took a deep breath and made a decision. It was time to stop waiting for her to fix things, time to stop hoping she would change. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about me. It was about figuring out how to live again. And I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let this break me. Not entirely. I put the phone down and stood up, walking toward the door. It was time to leave the past behind. It was time to move forward, even if I didn't know exactly how yet. The next few days felt like a blur. I went through the motions of life, work, errands, eating meals I didn't really enjoy, watching shows I couldn't concentrate on, but everything was just a distraction. Every moment, every breath felt like I was holding on to something that had already slipped through my fingers. I didn't hear from Jessica again. Not directly, at least. She had called once more, but I had ignored it. I couldn't bring myself to talk to her. Not when everything was still so raw. Not when I knew deep down that whatever was left between us was just ashes. The silence between us was a strange kind of peace. It was suffocating, but it also gave me space to think, to breathe. And slowly, I began to realize that as painful as it was, this was my chance to start over. I didn't have to carry the weight of her betrayal around with me forever. I didn't have to keep living in a relationship that was broken beyond repair. One morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity that I hadn't had before. I didn't feel ready to fully move on. How could I? But I knew I couldn't stay in this limbo. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when I knew it wasn't. So I did what I've been putting off for days. I packed a bag, not just for a weekend getaway, but for a break from everything that reminded me of her. I rented a cabin for the weekend about 2 hours away. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere where I could be alone with my thoughts without any reminders of the life I had been clinging to. When I got there, the cabin was isolated, surrounded by trees, and the kind of peace that made me feel like I could finally exhale. It was a modest place, nothing fancy, but the isolation felt like a blessing. I didn't want luxury, I wanted space. Space to think, to heal. The first night, I sat on the porch, a cup of coffee in hand, and watched the sun dip below the horizon. The world seemed so much quieter here. The calm was something I hadn't realized I needed until I was surrounded by it. For the first time in days, I didn't feel like I was drowning in the weight of everything. I thought about the messages Jessica had sent me. I thought about her walking out of the house, looking back only once with that cold expression, the one that said she had already made her decision. I realized then that I had been waiting for something from her, an apology and explanation, something that could make all of this make sense. But I was fooling myself. It wasn't going to happen. She wasn't going to fix this. She wasn't going to fix me. I thought about what I had lost, the trust, the love, the years of companionship that now felt like a distant memory. And then for the first time, I thought about what I had left. Me. And that had to be enough. I spent the weekend trying to let go of the anger. I journaled, I walked through the woods. I thought about all the things I put on, hold for so long, all the parts of myself I had neglected in the shadow of my relationship. With Jessica, I realized I didn't even recognize some of the things I used to love. The hobbies I'd given up, the dreams I'd abandoned, the passions I'd let fade away. I didn't want to just move on. I wanted to rebuild. Not just my life, but my sense of self. I didn't want to be defined by the woman who had betrayed me, the life we had built together, or the pain that was still fresh in my heart. I needed to rediscover who I was outside of all that. When I returned home, something was different. I didn't have all the answers, but I felt like I was beginning to understand something important. I didn't need her to move forward. I didn't need her approval or her explanation. I needed to let go. For good. And as much as it hurt, as much as I wanted to scream at the injustice of it all, I knew that this was the start of something new, the beginning of me taking control again. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I couldn't keep living in the shadow of the past. There was a life waiting for me beyond the walls of this house, beyond the lies, beyond the betrayal. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. I wasn't broken. I wasn't lost. I was just starting over. And that in itself felt like a victory. The weeks that followed were a strange mix of uncertainty and renewal. I didn't jump into anything drastic, but the decision to move forward really moved. Forward started to feel less like a choice and more like a necessity. The house was still the same, but it no longer felt like a place I shared with someone else. It was mine again, and slowly I began to reclaim the spaces she'd once filled. I threw out old things that reminded me of her photos, gifts, cards that felt like they belonged to another lifetime. It wasn't out of spite, it was out of necessity. I needed to clear the physical remnants of a life that no longer existed. It was a gradual process. Some days, the emptiness would hit me harder than others. The silence felt loud in the evenings when I would sit at the dining table alone, staring at the empty seat where she used to sit. Sometimes I'd pick up my phone, my finger hovering over her name in the contact list. But then I'd stop myself. I didn't need to hear her voice. I didn't need the promises she had no intention of keeping. The only thing I needed was to stay strong, to keep the focus on myself for once. At work, I threw myself into my projects. It was easier to stay busy than to think about the void that still existed in my personal life. The days passed more quickly when I was occupied, but the nights were still the hardest. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, letting my mind wander through memories I wasn't ready to revisit. The days of happy moments with Jessica felt like another lifetime. But as painful as it was, I had to let go of those moments, too. One night, after a particularly exhausting day at work, I found myself thinking about the future. It was the first time in a long time I allowed myself to consider what life could be like. Without her, without the constant weight of betrayal hanging over me. I thought about what I wanted, what I needed, and for the first time, the possibilities didn't feel as daunting as they once had. I decided to reach out to friends I hadn't seen in ages. Friends who had faded into the background when Jessica and I became more isolated, when it felt like the world outside of our relationship wasn't important. I sent a few messages to people I'd lost touch with, people who had been there before. Everything started to fall apart. The first response I got was from Ben, an old friend from college. He had always been the type to keep in touch, and his message was simple but kind. "It's been a while, man. Let's grab a drink sometime." I smiled, the first real smile I'd had in weeks. It felt like a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this. We met up the following weekend at a small bar in the city. As we caught up, I realized just how much I had missed real conversation, honest, open, no walls. Ben didn't ask me about Jessica, and for that I was grateful. It wasn't that I didn't want to talk about it, but I wasn't ready to unpack all of it. Yet, he just listened, offered advice when necessary, and didn't judge. By the end of the night, I felt lighter. It wasn't about forgetting everything that had happened. It was about realizing that I still had a life outside of the wreckage. I could still enjoy moments of joy, even if they were small. I could still find happiness without needing to cling to the past. In the following weeks, I started to rebuild my life in small, meaningful ways. I joined a local gym, something I had always wanted to do, but never made time for. I started reading books again, books I had left untouched for years. I found myself laughing more, even if it was just over something silly. One evening, as I was sitting on the porch, a thought crossed my mind. Maybe I can love again. It was a strange thought considering everything I had just gone through, but it didn't feel impossible. It didn't feel like betrayal to the past. I wasn't erasing what had happened with Jessica. I was simply realizing that life had more to offer. I wasn't sure when or if I'd be ready for something new, but the idea that the future could hold something better didn't scare me anymore. The truth was, I had already started the process of healing, not because of anything Jessica had done, but because I had taken the first steps toward healing myself. And that felt powerful. One night, I was standing in front of the mirror, brushing my teeth when I realized something. I was starting to see myself again. The man I used to be, the man I had forgotten, lost in the years of routine and complacency. It wasn't the man Jessica had known, but it was the man I needed to be. Strong, independent, free. I wasn't whole yet, but I was getting there. Little by little, piece by piece, I was putting myself back together. And for the first time since the day I found out about the affair, I felt like I was moving forward, not because I had to, but because I finally wanted to. The months slipped by, each one leaving behind its own mark, both painful and freeing in its own way. As the seasons changed, so did I. The way I carried in the wake of Jessica's betrayal had slowly started to lighten. It wasn't gone, not entirely, but it was no longer the defining thing in my life. The rawness, the sharp edge of my anger and hurt had dulled into something quieter, something I could live with. I still had my bad days, days when the quiet would press down on me too hard, and the memory of her would creep back in. In those days, I let myself feel whatever I needed to feel. but I never let myself fall back into the hole I had been in. I couldn't afford to. Not anymore. Work was going well. I'd taken on new projects, expanded my responsibilities. It felt like a small victory every time I accomplished something, as though I were rebuilding not just my personal life, but also my professional one. The office became a place where I could focus, where I could lose myself in the work instead of letting my mind wander back to the past. I was learning to find satisfaction in my own accomplishments rather than waiting for external validation from anyone else. I started seeing a therapist too. It wasn't about blaming myself for what happened with Jessica. It was more about understanding how I had gotten to the place I had been, why I allowed myself to stay stuck for so long. Therapy was helping me untangle all of that, to start fresh, to make sure that I didn't fall into old patterns if I ever entered another relationship. It was helping me realize that I wasn't defined by one failed marriage, by one painful chapter of my life. It was only one chapter. There were many more to come. And then, one evening, while I was out running errands, I bumped into someone. Her name was Claire. We met in line at the grocery store. Nothing extraordinary, at least not at first. She had a warm smile and a friendly, easy way about her. I wasn't sure if it was just coincidence or the fact that she seemed different, but we ended up chatting for a few minutes as we both waited for our items to be scanned. She was funny, down to earth, and the more we talked, the more I felt an odd sense of connection. She mentioned she just moved to the area, was still getting settled in. I told her about the city, about my favorite spots. Before either of us knew it, we had exchanged numbers, agreeing to meet up for coffee sometime. I wasn't expecting anything. To be honest, I wasn't even sure I was ready for anything. But something in her presence was easy, and it reminded me that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than the wounds I had been nursing for so long. We met for coffee the following weekend, and then a few more times after that. Every time we saw each other, I felt a little more comfortable, a little more open. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. Nothing about it was rushed, but it was a slow, steady process of getting to know someone who wasn't tied to my past. Someone who saw me for who I was, not for what I had been through. As time passed, I found myself looking forward to those moments with her. It was strange at first, allowing myself to be vulnerable in any way again. But Claire made it easy. She didn't pressure me. She didn't ask about my past, and I didn't feel the need to bring it up. We built our own story, one that had nothing to do with my mistakes or hers. One evening, as we were sitting in a small bistro, sipping wine and laughing over something ridiculous, I realized something. I was happy, not in the way I had been before, not in the way that had felt like an illusion, but real happiness. The kind that doesn't require you to bury your past in order to embrace the present. It wasn't about forgetting Jessica or pretending that everything had been perfect. It wasn't about pretending I hadn't been hurt, but it was about recognizing that I deserved more than just survival. I deserved to thrive, and I wasn't going to let my past dictate my future. And Claire, she was part of that future now, not because I needed her to fix me, but because I'd already started to fix myself. She was just someone who fit into my life in a way that felt natural, like a piece I didn't realize was missing until it was there. She wasn't my savior, she was my partner, and that was something I hadn't thought I'd find again. As we sat there, my hand in hers, I thought about everything that had led me here, all. The pain, the lessons, the growth. I thought about how far I had come, how much stronger I was now than I had been before. The man I was then, broken, desperate for something that wasn't real, was not the man. Sitting at that table, enjoying the company of someone who made me feel whole again. I didn't need Jessica anymore. I didn't need her lies or her betrayal to define me. I had created something new, something real, and that was enough. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly free. Time has a funny way of healing wounds, but it also has a way of making you forget just how deep those wounds once were. It's been several months now since I last spoke to Jessica, and while I haven't completely forgotten the pain, I've learned to live with it. It's a scar I'll carry, but it no longer controls me. Looking back, I can see how much I've changed. I've learned to prioritize myself, to understand that my happiness isn't dependent on someone else's actions, especially when those actions were as damaging as hers. The man I was when I first found out about her affair, that confused, angry, broken version of myself, is a stranger to me now. I've become someone who knows his worth, who understands that he deserves better than what he was given, and someone who knows how to move forward. I've been seeing Claire more, and with each passing day, I find myself more and more grateful for her presence in my life. It's not that she fills a gap left by Jessica. No one could, but she's someone who brings something entirely different to the table, a quiet, steady kind of companionship. We don't have the same history, the same baggage. What we have is new, and that feels like a gift I didn't know I could give myself. There's something beautiful about starting fresh with someone who doesn't come with expectations or emotional baggage. We've shared stories, laughed over small things, and built something together little by little. I still keep the memory of Jessica, not with resentment, but with the understanding that it was part of my journey. It was a chapter that taught me a lot about trust, about myself, and about what I really want from life. Claire and I have taken things slow, not rushing toward anything, but allowing the relationship to unfold naturally. She respects my space when I need it, and she's been supportive in a way that feels effortless. It's a partnership, not a dependency, and that's something I hadn't known was possible before. I've also rekindled old friendships, friends who were there for me before everything went south, but who I had lost touch within the whirlwind of my marriage. There's something incredibly healing about surrounding yourself with people who remember the person you used to be before everything changed. They've helped me reconnect with parts of myself I had abandoned, and they've shown me how much I've grown. One day I was sitting on the porch with Ben, my old college friend, talking about how life had changed since we last really caught up. "You seem lighter," he said, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "It's like you've shed something." I laughed, but it wasn't just a laugh. It was a laugh of relief. I said, "I've shed a lot, but I'm still here. And that's the best part." Ben nodded like he understood. "Good for you, man." And I realized in that moment that I had come a long way. I had faced the deepest parts of myself, the parts that I was afraid of, and come out stronger. On the other side, I had learned that being alone didn't mean being broken. It meant being whole in a way I had never understood before. I don't think I'll ever forget the pain that came with Jessica's betrayal. I don't think I'm supposed to, but I also know that I am more than that pain. I am more than the lies, the deception, and the heartbreak. I've discovered parts of myself that I never knew existed, and I've realized that my worth isn't tied to someone else's actions or choices. So as I sit here, now looking out at the sunset with Claire by my side, I realize that I've come to a place of peace. I've learned that life doesn't stop just because something ends. In fact, sometimes it's only when one chapter closes that you're able to see the pages ahead, waiting to be written. And as for Jessica, I don't wish her ill. I don't wish for anything anymore. She's part of my story, but she no longer has the power to control the ending. Thank you for your time, and that's the end of my story. Subscribe to not miss more videos like this. And remember, history is a chance to become a better person, and see you soon.